Up next is a Canadian-made Silvertone console stereo. This would have been sold by Simpson Sears, and it's in a big wood cabinet. This is a solid-state version AM/FM radio with a 4-speed stereo record changer. Picked this one up, was given to me non-functional. We're going to make it work so that I can turn around and pass it on to someone else, because I really don't need something quite this big, but let's check it out. Today I have an old Silvertone console AM/FM radio with stereo, of course, with the turntable, and this one here is dead. Let's take a look at it. So we open up the cabinet, we'll see that it does have a BSR turntable. Now the turntable is not seized up or anything, it does turn, but as you can see, no power, and the unit itself, no power to the unit. It is plugged in, and it does have power. As you can see, I've got it plugged into an extension cord. It does have power. This one does have a reset button on the back, and it doesn't seem to do anything. It might be a bad breaker. The only way to tell is to pull the chassis out, take it into the shop, so I can work on it. This one's a little bit big, so I can't take this whole entire console in as it sits, as I just don't have the room right now for something like this. So I'm going to pull it back, pull the chassis, take the chassis into the shop, see if we can get the radio to work, and then I can put this up for free. Something like this, they're not worth a lot of money, so most people just give them away. I got this one given to me because obviously it doesn't work. So let's see if we can get this one working so that I can give this one away to somebody else. Screws out, the back just pulls off. There is an interlock on this one, so it'll actually remove the back. This is a solid state unit, obviously. There's the guts of it. A couple more screws and the chassis should lift out. And then we can look and see what's gone wrong with it. So there's 4 screws that held the back panel on, and then there's 4 more. These ones here were not even in tight. I could take them out with my fingers. So obviously somebody's been into this before and they've just put the chassis back in. Half the stuff wasn't even plugged into it. So this may be, someone's looked into this thing and maybe condemned it before. We may have to do the same. But we're going to pull the chassis out anyway, take it into the shop, see whether we can make it to work, see what the problem is. If it's something that's major, obviously I'm not going to be going ahead with it, because I'm not going to put any money into something that I'm going to give away, basically. I'll just put it back up again free. Needs work. And whoever wants to take it away can take it away for the cabinet. It does have a fairly nice cabinet. Somebody would turn something like this probably into a liquor cabinet without the guts to it, because it is a nice piece of furniture. Anyway, there's a couple plugs here that come out that connect the turntable portion up to it. They're right in here. They just unplug the left and right inputs from the turntable. Just unplug like that. And there's probably a wire that goes down to the turntable as well for power. And then the whole chassis will just slide out from the front. This is probably the power, is that the power wires there? That's speakers. Got to unplug the speakers, unplug the power to the turntable, and then the entire chassis just slides out from the front. This is the power plug for the turntable right here. Just a multi-connector that takes power down. Speakers plug in right here. I know it's hard to see with the sun and everything, but speakers plug in there. And the turntable's unplugged. Now this whole unit will just slide out from the front. I tell you, I'm sure glad my camcorder has an eyepiece, because the flip out screen, I can't see a thing on this. I feel sorry for those that have cameras that don't have an actual eyepiece that you can put your eye up against. Chassis just slides out just like this. So there it is on the bench. There's the bench camera there. We're going to get the lights on and see what's wrong with this unit. Okay, this unit was made in Toronto by Sears, Canada. This is Silvertone. It was their own brand. It was their own house brand. But as you can see, they made this chassis would have been made in Canada. It says, order parts by mail or through any of our retail stores. Simpson Sears Limited, Toronto, Ontario. Capacitors made in England. Take a look at the bottom of this sucker. Okay, a lot of point-to-point wiring on this. It's a solid-state unit. But chances are it's not going to have much in the way of bad capacitors in it. Made in Canada capacitors. Check this out. I mean, this was, you know, we used to make our stuff here, right? We used to make our own electronics here in Canada, and the Americans made their electronics in the States. Obviously, this is before the great invasion from Japan, and we made some good products. Relatively easy to work on. Here's some transistors here. You know, no circuit boards, they're just point to point. Just stick the transistors in and solder them down. But yeah, these units actually weren't bad. Weren't very high power. It's a capacitor coupled outputs. Where are they going here? Speaker terminals. Yellow one. I think those are capacitor coupled outputs on this. Maybe I'm wrong. I think they are. Delco transistors. GM, General Motors. Turntable plugs in here. The phono input here. This is the output power for the audio in from the turntable plugs in here. This is the power out to the turntable. Radio is on a circuit board. The radio circuit's over here. The IF and the tuning is on a little circuit board with the tuning dial string that goes all the way around the end here. Metal pulleys. That all works. These ones here are actually probably the output capacitors over here. More than likely those ones. Looks like the speaker wires come up here. The red wire comes up there and the yellow wire comes up here. So these are going to be the output filters. So it's a complementary output. Here's one channel here. Here's the two transistors. And here's the other channel here. But it's a complementary output, so they're all going to be NPN. They'll be the same number of transistors. Which they are. So this is what they call a complementary output for NPN transistors. With the floating output, the level is, or the speaker output is floating at half the potential from the power supply. That's why the capacitor is needed to block the DC. Anyway, this unit is totally dead. It doesn't turn on at all. So the first thing we need to check on this unit is the circuit breaker to make sure that it's actually functional, because sometimes these circuit breakers went bad and they blew and they wouldn't reset. So let's just check the circuit breaker and see whether it's open. Ah! The circuit breaker is open. So usually you push these in and they'll reset. This one here does not appear to be resetting, which was quite often what happened on these old units, is the circuit breakers failed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jumper the circuit breaker for now, for testing. I'm going to jumper over the circuit breaker, and I'm going to plug it into my dim bulb tester. That way, if there's a short somewhere, the dim bulb is going to light up. And if the dim bulb lights up bright, then we know we've got a fault. But if the dim bulb doesn't light up, then we'll hook up some speakers and see if we've got sound. It might be something as simple as the circuit breaker failed on this unit, because to say this circuit breaker is open and it's not resetting, and they did fail. You know, that was a problem that would happen on them from time to time, is that they would just go bad, trip, and would not reset. So first things first, we're gonna have to hook this up to my cheater cord, which is just a wire with cord on the plug on the end. We'll use some patch cords to plug it in, or jumpers to connect it up here to the actual power. I can just basically connect one right to there. That'll bypass, because if we notice here, well, let's see, where's it go? It goes two ways. One, I think, goes up to here for the switch. But I think one goes up to one ends up going up to the power outlet on the back, so that when the turntable's turned on, it will turn on the power and it returns on probably the blue wire. Looks that way. So if I connect one to here and one to there, that should power the unit up. let's see what happens. Okay, I've connected my power leads up. Let's plug in and see whether we get a light. We got nothing there. Okay, good. No short, but the power switch isn't turned on yet. Let's turn on the switch and see what happens. Where's the switch on this thing? Down here. Oh, I don't see any light. So, is this unit working? Or is there still a problem? I don't have any speakers connected, so I wouldn't expect to hear any sound, but I don't see any light whatsoever on my dim bulb, so we're not drawing excessive current. I know I've got power to here because if I short the leads together, so I know that my cord is working. All right, let's see if we got any B plus when I turn on the power. So I'll just put my meter on one side on ground, and the other side I'll hook up to one of my capacitors here and turn on the power and see if we got any power. And we have about 20 volts on this one, and what do we have on this one here? We should also have some voltage, I think, on this one here. Where are we? Minus 20. Okay, so we've got voltage. We've got voltage on the two main filters, so therefore there is power. I don't see any lights, but hey, the lights may be burnt out. Let's connect some speakers and see if there's any sound. Okay, speakers are connected. Hit power. I think we got something. Let's see if we can tune anything in. I don't know what we're on now. Are we on AM or FM? Probably on AM. I don't know how this even works. But we have sound. Stereo. Hey, it works. FM works, so I'm assuming that all that's wrong with it was the circuit breaker was defective. Gonna clean the controls, I'm sure. Controls need to be cleaned. Let's clean the controls. We can take it off the dim bulb too at this point because we know that there's no short. It's working. We'll clean up the controls, make sure everything works, and then I'll more than likely just wire a fuse across this circuit breaker because I don't have any circuit breakers, and I don't even know if I can get them still. They used to sell them, but I haven't had one for forever. It's been, you know, since God was a child, and I hate to use that term because I just probably just offended half of my viewers. But that was a term we used to say, so there you go. Let me get some neutral. We'll clean these controls. We'll get a fuse wired in place here and put this one back together and put it back up for giveaway because, as I say, I'd love to be able to sell it for something, but I just know that nobody's going to buy something like this. It's just one of those things that people just won't spend any money or very little on something like this. I got it for free. I'll probably put it up for 50 bucks or something and then see what someone comes to me with an offer on. But anyway, we'll see how it sounds once I get it back in the cabinet. I bet it sounds pretty good. So let's just get in here with some neutral. We'll spray these controls and clean them up a bit. This one's got a balance control in it as well as the volume control, so we're going to spray all three controls. And of course the bass and treble. I would guess that this is probably late 60s, early 70s design. The fact that it's got circuit board in it as well, it would have been an early circuit board, but the amplifier, it's all still point-to-point connections. So it's, you know, before circuit boards became popular. I'm sure this old stereo probably someone had it for years and years and they played tons of records. The memories that what these old receivers and these old consoles bring back, because I remember as a kid growing up we had an old RCA console. It had a black and white TV in the middle and you pulled the doors over the TV when you weren't using it, over the tube, and it had an old Gerard record player in it, and a vacuum tube amp. I loved that thing. When the TV blew up on it and the TV was shot and the TV was taken away, I pulled the chassis out, and I just had, and I'm kidding you not, I had a bare chassis, a tube chassis, just sitting in my bedroom on a shelf. My dad made a little wooden cabinet, you know, like it was like a microwave stand, but my dad made a little wooden cabinet, and I stuck the chassis in it, and I put my turntable on top. The Gerard turntable, I think, was it Gerard? I think it was a Gerard. It was shot. It wouldn't work. So I had put my regular, I think I put a BSR, and I just had it sitting on top, and I had the chassis, but it was never framed in or anything nice. It didn't look nice. It looked like it got pulled out of a cabinet. It looked like the face for this. But it had AM, FM, but no stereo, but it had an amplifier, a tube amplifier, and I just loved the sound, and that's where I really got hooked on tubes, was from this old RCA. It probably only had maybe 9 or 10 watts output power, but it really sounded, it was beautiful sounding. It was a single ended, so it probably was only 8 or 9 watts tops. I think they were 6L6 tubes. I could be wrong, but they might have been 6L6 or something in that of that. They were like a pentode output, but just a single and a transformer. And I listened to that thing for years and years and years, and I don't know whatever happened to it. The only reason I stopped listening to it is I got a more powerful Akai system. I bought an Akai AM-U02, and I still have that, an amplifier, which was 27 watts per channel, and I was like in seventh heaven because I had 27 watts versus the 7 or 8 that I had before. But and then of course I had several other stereos over the years. I don't know whatever happened to the chassis. It obviously went to the bin at some point. Anyway, now that these controls are cleaned, let's fire this thing up at full power. Okay, power on. What's on here? Oh. Hanging out in the terminal with an antenna. All these buttons do. Oops, I left that on too long.
Et vous We know being a mom isn't easy.
Gotta actually hang on to the antenna terminal to get half decent reception. AFC. Check the AFC out. AFC works. Tune it off frequency and turn on the AFC. Well, that part's working. Excellent. AM also works. I just had to orient the antenna in the correct direction.
FC.com/tickets.
At
At Mercedes-Benz Richmond, it's about more than just selling vehicles.
If you need some tricks to keep the conversation going and make it a little smoother. Palm Natural Market is proud to carry many local products from the lower and ethically sourced groceries.
Says its members have voted unanimous.
Interesting.
A phase out of older crops.
Check this out. So on the front, there's 3 lights on the front for your stereo. There's a mood light, whatever that does.
The organization's annual assembly this morning in Vancouver.
I guess that makes it sound like the stereo is wider even when you're on mono.
An investigation of staff complaints against her. Archibald says she's not aware of any other cheat being.
Anyway, there's an FM stereo indicator, the beacon, but when you've got the FM stereo turned off, there's a little light that comes on to tell you when you've tuned to a stereo station. When you're in mono mode, alert. This light says alert. Right? When the alert light comes on, that's alerting you that you are on a stereo station. So you switch to stereo, and then stereo beacon comes on. Of course, if you,
one of the most prolific singer-songwriters.
of course, if you tune into a mono station, you get nothing. But that's what this light is for. That light comes on when you tune to a stereo station. And again, I don't have an antenna on here, so.
Burnaby Police investigation. It's close between Imperial and Victory Street. Use Sussex for boundary. Pothole repair in Surrey, eastbound 104th at 140th Street in the left lane.
So I don't have an antenna on it, so it's not going to pick up much other than my test transmitter down here. And there we are, stereo. Anyway, this one works, so I guess all I need to do now is cut off the power so I don't get zapped when I disconnect the test leads over here, but I just need to get a fuse and wire a fuse. I'm going to make up a pigtail fuse and put a fuse on here. Now I've got to determine what the value of this was. It probably wasn't very high. It's probably only like a 1 or a 2 amp circuit breaker, but we'll take off this tape. They usually are marked with what they are. I mean, for that matter, I might even be able to repair the circuit breaker depending on why it failed. If it failed just because it was laid on its back, for example, which is a possibility, it could just be physically broken inside, or it might just be the contacts themselves are shot. It should tell me what value this is. It's all wrapped up in tape. So say sometimes these things can be fixed if it's just a spring or something that's come off where they reset. And that's safe. There's no back on this thing. Just wrapped up in tape. There's no end cap on this. That's safe. Yeah, imagine if that thing started to spark inside there and set that masking tape that's just covering the ends on fire. Yeah, that's a real good safe design. I'm wondering if somebody repaired this in the past and just pulled the ends off of them, which is very possible. These normally would have had a metal cap or a fiber type cap on the back. They wouldn't normally be open like this at the back, but sometimes people tended to repair these things because they would get stuck. And usually when they get stuck, you just push it down like that and then it'll start to work. And I bet it's good now. If I measure this thing, I bet it's going to beep. Yeah, you see. What happens on these is they get usually somebody lays it on its back or something and it bends, or the button gets pushed in and that sticks. That's when you reset it, it pulls this up, and this is supposed to go back down. But if the button gets pushed in too far, it will bend the internal mechanism, and when that happens, normally when you press it, it's supposed to lift this up and then a spring pulls it back down. But if it gets bent, it doesn't reset. And somebody probably had this apart before to fix it, and they didn't put the end caps on. They just stuck masking tape, which is kind of silly. This masking tape is made out of paper, and it can burn if there was a spark. So, I mean, ideally you would want to put something that can't burn over there, such as, I don't know, electrical tape or a piece of plastic or something that if there's a spark, it's not going to ignite it. Anyway, that fixes it. It's just sticking. That's all that's inside it. Right, so when you push it down, when you push down the button, it brings this up to reset it, and then this goes back down. It pulls this up to reset this is the circuit breaker part here. So there's a little spring in here, and if the current goes too high, that flips up like that. That's what opens the circuit, right? And then when you push down the reset button, what the reset button does when you push it in is it basically flexes this back. This pulls up like this. And there's a little hook down here, which is what's bent. So we just straighten up this little foot on the end here. When this lifts up, this resets the spring, and then that drops back down like that. And now it is reset, you see. So what happens if something pushes too hard on the red button on the back, which is what pulls this up by pushing down on this lever, what it does is it pushes down on that, which is what pulls that up, okay? So what happens is when someone pushes too hard on here, like if they lay this thing flat on its back in the back of a pickup truck or something, right? Or it gets bashed up against the wall. That was another one. Someone pushed the unit up against the wall and the button gets pushed in. This gets bent so that it can no longer drop back down. And of course, and if it's tripped, you try to reset it. Well, that comes up like that, but it never resets it. Right, so what we need to do is we need to fix the curvature of this, because you can see that this is already bent. This needs to be bent in such a way that it can actually pull this up. So we need to twist this up a bit this way so that it has more leverage to reset it. So now when I push this in, it should push this down enough that it can actually reset it like that. And then this is supposed to drop back down. This is still a bit bent here on the end, so we'll just bend this in just a little bit. There we go. Now it'll reset it. If it trips, like that, it opens the contact here, and if we push this in, it now resets it. You see, when you push it in, it lifts up contact. So all these circuit breakers are designed in such a way that if you push in, they will actually disconnect. So this breaker is now fully functional again. You see, you guys just learned something about these old style circuit breakers. And one of the common reasons why they fail is because people abuse them. They push the button too hard, and it causes a problem. So now if I can just put this thing back together and not put tape on it. This originally would have had, the end caps would have had a material like this fire retardant. It's like a paper in there. That's what was in the ends on these, or there was metal. They weren't normally open like that, but someone's worked on this in the past, and that's how they left it. And fortunately, we see a lot of stuff like that. There was a lot of shady workers out there in the 60s and the 70s. They just didn't care. Maybe they weren't trained well enough, or they just didn't care, or they didn't think that there would be an issue with it. But for safety, we want to make sure that this is enclosed. because there's voltage on here, right? That's connected. So we'll put the cover back on. On both sides. When I push the button down, we should see that pin lift up and then go back down. So see, that lifts up and then it goes back down. So now you see how it operates. When I push the button in, it pulls the tab up to reset it, and then it releases it back down where it was sticking before. We have continuity now through the circuit breaker. So this should work. I'm going to put some black tape around here just to insulate it. It'll be a little bit better than what they had on there before with just paper tape. So it might help if I don't have something leaning on the breaker, because if I push on the button, it'll shut the power off, you see. It's into reset mode. So I had it leaning on it like that. That's enough to shut it off. I was wondering why it wasn't coming on, but the breaker was off, because it just doesn't take much to push on that to shut it off. So we are good to go. Now this probably does need dial lights. I don't have any dial lights, and because I'm not going to be selling this thing for any money, it's most likely going to be given away. I'm not too worried about replacing the lights. If someone wants to replace the lights, they can certainly order some lights in and replace it. I was just more concerned about, let's make the thing make noise, and then I can find it a new home. So for those of you that are going to be upset that I'm not changing the lights, too bad. That's a you problem, not my problem. Let's get this chassis reinstalled. Okay, now the unit's bolted back in, we're going to plug in the turntable portion, which plugs into these plugs on the back side here. And then of course the plug for the power for the record changer, it plugs in right here. Back plate is screwed on. We're just going to connect up the FM antenna wires to the FM terminals on the back here. I guess they hang out the back and connect on at the back. Put the back on it and test it. Well, there it is, back together. Let's test out the turntable and see if it works. Oh, I think we may have to fix the turntable. Well, maybe not. It might pick up once it drops. I think the idler might be slipping a little bit on here. We may have to help that out a bit. But let's see if it plays. I think we know the reason why it doesn't play any sound. It doesn't have a needle. The needle is missing. That's just the rubber, it's a ceramic type cartridge. That's just the rubber support that the cantilever fit in that I was touching there. So we know it's picking up sound, but it needs a stylus. As we can see, there's no stylus on here at all. But the pickup works, so whoever gets this is going to have to find a stylus for it. One thing I will do is I'll put some rubber renew on the idler tower, at least to get the torque up on the turntable. So I just got to go and grab a screwdriver to pull the little clip off here so that I can remove the table and get to the idler. I think this piece pops out if I'm not mistaken on this one. This lifts up. Then we can get at the clip underneath here. It's got a great big E-clip on here. E-clip. Just like that. And I can lift the platter off. I'll get some rubber renew. Grease still looks okay on here. This is still good. The the idler is in need of servicing, so we'll get some rubber renew on here, and that's it. You know, because I say it's as long as it spins. I think I'm going to have to take the turntable inside and just do some more work on it. So I've already released the little clips from below so I can lift the turntable out, and it should just unplug from the bottom here, providing that the wires are not too short. I should be able to unplug the power connector and the audio plugs from the bottom here, because it just plugs in. So there's the two audio plugs and the power connector. Now I can lift this entire deck in, and we'll take this inside and take a look at it and lubricate the motor and stuff. Alright, I got the turntable portion in the shop. Let's lubricate the motor. First I'll remove the motor by removing out the 4 screws that hold the bracket in place. Got to remove these 3 C clips. I think these ones are C as opposed to E clips. They're shaped a little different. The motor will drop out. Okay, now I can work on the motor out of the unit itself. We disconnect the wires here. Take it right off the chassis. There's the motor assembly. We're going to put some oil into these bearings because they're probably pretty dry at this point in the game. This will help fill up the reservoir for the sintered bearing. Same for the other side. Some oil down into here, help fill up that reservoir a bit. All right, time to remount the motor. I will lubricate the shaft now that the whole system is apart. We'll do that while we've got it apart. Let me just reconnect the motor wires here to the switch. Lubricate the bearings. Lubricate the ball bearings in the base and the ladder bearing. Sounds a little more quiet than before. I'll reattach the C-clip. Then we'll take this unit out and pop it back in the system. Again, I can't really test it for sound because, well, I don't have a cartridge, but at least we know that the table now has been lubricated and it's going to be as good as it's going to be once the stylus is replaced. Let's go back out and reattach the turntable to the base, and then we'll finish this one off. Bonus, I found the needle in the base. Cool. Is it any good? Well, we'll clip it in and see if it works. There we go. Excellent. Now I can try it out. Hardest part is getting the power plug in. It's the shortest one of them all. I can get myself a nice shock here. I'm not careful because the thing's powered up. Okay, plug back in. Put the latches back in place here to lock it in place. Look, it's even got the original sticker from when it was new. Okay. Well, it's looking a little better. Oops, I'm on the 10-inch record position. Still struggles a little bit when it's rejecting, but this should shut off now because it's at the end of the record. So if I turn the record over, and now it's on the 12-inch size record, it should drop the arm where it's supposed to. Anyway, it works. And that's all I can ask for. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.